So a little bit about myself. I want to start with introductions. My name is George Makaye. I'm originally from Kenya, as you can tell from my Texas accent. But I've been here 27 years. I came here when I was 22. I just graduated from college. I did electrical engineering. Then during my last semester, right before graduation, I got a letter from my dad. And was an emergency letter asking me to go back home. And when I got there, everybody was celebrating. And I asked them, what are you guys celebrating about? And they said, hey, you just won a green card to go to the United States. So I'm a lottery winner. And I landed in Dallas and been there since I came here 27 years ago. Me and my wife, we started doing a lot of mission work around the world, spending short-term mission, being sent out by our church to go on short-term mission trips around the world. In 2003, I got a chance to go back to Kenya 5 years later after leaving on a mission trip because there were two tribes that were fighting over water and a couple hundred people have been killed. And so our bishop wanted us to go out and broker peace between these two tribes, as well as the church was going to fund water wells to help stop the fighting. So I went back home for the first time on a mission trip, and it was such a life-changing experience for me because going back to your home country and being able to obviously stop the fighting and then as well as be able to, provide the water wells to the church was just such a transformation experience. My wife and I, we sat down, we're like, I was a cybersecurity professional at the time, and then my wife was in HR. We said, let's start our own business, and we can use the business to give back and do more mission work. So GXA was born. So GXA stands for George and Alicia, and that's how the company started, which is we're essentially an IT and cybersecurity consulting company, and we help small, medium organizations, fortify their security. In this case, obviously help them with security compliance, as well as making sure they upgrade IT. So let's talk about today. We're going to be looking at why cybersecurity matters for the aging services, some of the top security threats, touch a little bit about HIPAA, security standards, and some of the core cybersecurity strategies that I'd like for you guys to walk away with, and then how to prepare for cyber incidents. So let's start with why. I always believe that why is more important than the how and the what. Reasons come first. And so why is cybersecurity important in the aging services? One is because the aging services industry obviously is a prime target for cyber attacks because you have data that cyber criminals want. And the reason they want that data is because they can monetize the data, right? It's about the money. And then on the other side is obviously the data is sensitive and it's regulated under HIPAA. And so on the other side, you have the regulators who want to enforce you following the HIPAA standards, right? And so and non-compliance can lead to fines, lawsuits, and things like that. There's obviously the consequences on one side, which is exposure of that data to cyber criminals, but also the legal and potential lawsuits and disruptions and fines that it could cause. So for that reason, I think cybersecurity is a leadership issue, and it cannot be relegated or delegated to the IT team. And so it's got to really be a top-down approach. So here are some of the top cyber threats that are based on several sources, right, that actually affect care facilities. And I'm going to just touch on the top three, and I'll address those as we go throughout the slides. So one is the phishing and social engineering. 80% of all security breaches involve a human. Could be something the IT department did or did not do. It could be social engineering against the user, right? So that is a very big component when you're looking at cybersecurity strategies and how to mitigate cyber risk. The other one is third-party vendors. I think that's a huge area for improvement because in this day and age where we have cloud, how many people, I would say 50% of your applications that you use in the business are cloud-based, at least. So it used to be that you had servers, a server room, and you can put a firewall and, put all these kind of security mechanisms. But now most of your applications is in the cloud. Right now, so your attack surface, which is basically has been extended to your cloud vendors. So you don't only have to care about your own security. Part of your security program should include assessing your third-party vendors to ensure that they have minimum security controls in place. Because if they don't do it, and they get breached, you're going to get impacted and the operations are going to be impacted. And then obviously ransomware attacks is about 25% of the attacks involve ransomware. I talk about misconfigured cloud platforms, and that is something I think that's important is as we move into the cloud, many organizations do not think about just because I move my applications in the cloud, they relegate the security responsibility to the cloud vendor. They say, hey, Microsoft has my security, I have security in place. You would assume they do, right? But the reality is your security is still your responsibility. Just because you move your emails into Microsoft 365 does not mean that your email is secure. So there are things you can do to what I call harden your cloud platforms to make sure that they are secure, but that is still ultimately your responsibility. The other one is data breaches via unsecure devices, insider threats, obviously. Generally, that's either accidental, where people have more access than they need, but also some of it is malicious, and then outdated software and systems where we're not doing proper patching or we're not upgrading devices and applications and systems in a consistent way. So from a HIPAA standpoint, here are the three big areas security actually touches. So one is what I would call the administrative safeguards. Administrative safeguards essentially outside the soft part of the security, which is policies, processes, procedures, standards, security awareness training, incident response plans, things like that, as well as, for example, being able to make sure that you have somebody in the organization who's accountable for security and privacy, right? By the way, that cannot be your outsourced vendor. Your security officer needs to be an employee of the organization. They can delegate the responsibility or part of that responsibility to an outside vendor. The outside vendor can facilitate, right? But ultimately, the responsibility stands on an actual individual who's part of that organization. Physical safeguards, that's really things that have to do with where you have your PHI, is it secure? Do you have locks and do you have access control? And then devices and workstations, do you have those secured, physically secured, so somebody can access them? And obviously, if you're using USB drives and other mobile or other devices, do you make sure those are encrypted? Do you have an inventory of those devices, right? So they're being checked in and checked out. And you can actually account for them. Technical controls is basically what the IT team does, right? Access control, username, passwords, who has access to what, turning on auditing and logs, integrity, making sure that data has integrity and is being maintained, encryption and things like that. So here are what I'll call quick wins and things that you can take away real quickly. On the left-hand side is what I call technical control. So these are the things that the IT team would do, right? And that's enforcing strong passwords and making sure that obviously you're auditing who has access to what and making sure accounts that are unused have been disabled and ensuring that those who have access to the network have the appropriate permissions and not too much access. Multi-factor authentication, we're familiar with that. Patching, encrypting data, right? That is a requirement that data has to be encrypted at rest and in transit. Obviously, installing firewalls and antivirus, making sure security is being monitored. Security monitoring is important because a lot of the times, if you have proper security monitoring, you can react or respond to potential attacks because you can see when a potential bad actor gets into your network. We find a lot of the times without security monitoring, organizations have been breached and they just don't know. So that's a big component from a reactive standpoint. Obviously, if you're using mobile devices, you have employees who are using their own personal devices. What are you doing to ensure that the corporate organizational data is secure, right? Because you have no control over their personal device, but if they're going to access email and SharePoint and your corporate applications, we want to make sure that corporate data is secured. And also, when they get offboarded, right, as part of offboarding, that data is being deleted before they leave the organization. Obviously, user offboarding, user onboarding, proper onboarding. And last but not least is backups, right? I want to say backup is your last defense. What are the things that are in place to make sure that you have good backups, they're being tested regularly, and there's evidence that the backup's actually working. So the other side is what I call security awareness training. We talked about 80% of the cyber attacks. Successful attacks involve a human. So strengthening what we call the human firewall, right, and ensuring that the staff are being trained on a regular basis. So while leadership matters, there's a common axiom that I love is that goes like this: speed of leader equals speed of team. Speed of leader equals speed of team. If this leadership prioritizes security, then the security will become an organizational priority. So many times I talk to decision makers and organizational leaders and I say, what's your security program like? They're like, oh, my IT guy has it. He's got it under control. Security cannot just be, one, security is more than just technical, right? There's a lot more to security than just the technical. But also for security to be effective, it has to start from the top. There has to be executive buy-in and sponsorship. So because the leadership sets the tone for the culture of security and compliance. Obviously, they're involved in when policies are being written and procedures, right? They want to make sure those are written, but also they're being followed. And there's accountability around that. And then making sure that obviously that the training component is in place, right? As part of obviously HIPAA, you have to do the HIPAA training, but also that should also include the security awareness training as well. And then overseeing risk assessment and making sure that, there's an incident response planning. So leadership is so important when it comes to effective security, where there's sponsorship, there's awareness, things are more effective when they come from the top. So let's touch on security awareness training. I'll give you guys a story to kind of elaborate on why security awareness and training is important. My son is 17, so he just started driving and just got a job. About 12 years ago, we moved into a new house. He was 5. And obviously, part of moving into a house, you install all the security around the house, making sure that, all the entry points have been secure, and that we had a security monitoring company called, Smith Thompson. So we got everything implemented. And I felt pretty good, right? We had all the access control in place. And then, so one afternoon, I'm taking a nap upstairs, and my son was downstairs watching, and I abruptly get a walk-in by my son, all excited, saying, Daddy, we have visitors in the living room. I said, okay. So I go downstairs, and there are these 2 teenagers who are sitting on the couch. We have a Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall close by. They were doing the coming through the neighborhood, and they knocked on the door, and my son just went open the door and said, come on right in. And he allowed them to sit down, and and then came up and actually woke me up. To me, that really highlights you can implement the best security in place. You can put really good firewalls, have all the controls in place, and all the what I call the technical controls right in place. But when you don't actually train the users, right? And this is a great example of where if the users don't know what not to do, right? I can secure the castle, but if the bad actor or the enemy knocks on the window and the inhabitants open the window and they walk right in, it doesn't matter how big my gates were and how much security I had around the perimeter, right? And so security awareness and cyber criminals have identified that. So that's why social engineering and phishing is one of the most effective attack vectors out there. So there are 2 components in security awareness training and training program. One is educating the staff when employees, when part of their onboarding should be, as they go through obviously the required HIPAA training, there should also be security awareness training, what to do, what are the policies, and then what to do, not to do, safe ways to access use the technology that's about to be given. And then the other one is simulated phishing, right? So this is a way for you to send fake phishing emails and see the people who are going to click, right? Because part of the security program is to ensure that it's getting stronger and stronger and better is identifying the people who are the high-risk users, right? Generally, it's going to be about 20% of your staff who are the ones who just click on emails and they don't even think about it, right? So you want to identify those and then have what we call remedial training available. So they go through remedial training so you can continue to measure and strengthen them and help them be more aware. So 2 components. One is the training, annual required awareness training, but also remedial training for those who actually fail. And so there are a lot of tools out there. KnowBe4 is one, Bullfish is another one that actually can make this a lot easier. You can look at reports and be able to make decisions. But this is a very effective way of doing it. And it's all about the rhythms, right? If you're going to do initially, when you start this program, you want to do it monthly, but then over time, you can scale it back to quarterly as the user becomes stronger and stronger and better. So let's talk about preparing for cyber incidents. So part of business continuity should really be security incident response planning. And making sure that you're creating an effective security incident response plan and having that in place that's obviously accounts for things like ransomware. What happens if we have a ransomware attack? What happens if we have a successful phishing email? What happens if we have malware? And coming up with all these scenarios and putting together incident response plans. So that's one component to it. The next component is making sure you do the what are called, they're really actually called tabletop exercises. So tabletop exercise is essentially the drills and simulations you do on a regular basis to test the effectiveness of your security incident response plan. And what you want to do is come up with these scenarios and walk through, if an employee walks in today and at 8 a.m., they turn on their computer and there's a ransomware message on their computer. What do we do next? What are those steps? And so you walk through those steps, and many times what happens when you go through that, you identify gaps, right? Because when you write the security incident plan, it's usually theoretical and it's kind of best case scenario, and then you start walking through those kind of real life scenarios. You're like, whoa, wait a minute. We forgot about that. We should add this to the plan and things like that. And many times when we go through the tabletop exercises, what we found is most of the gaps are around communication. We don't think about, hey, when should I let my cyber insurance know that we have a breach? Depending on the breach, if it's ransomware, probably as soon as possible, because you don't want your IT team to start to respond and start to restore backups or try to investigate and overwrite evidence, right? Because generally the cyber insurance company will send their own team of forensics team to come out and start to get involved in that process, right? When do we notify HHS and OCR? When do we notify, the legal team, depending on or PR or stuff like that? So, and then having all these kind of plan and documentation, and I would say the contact information somewhere that's not on the server, because if you get ransomware and it gets encrypted, then your plan is on the server and all your contact information on the server, and then now you left without a plan. So make sure that's actually somewhere else and it's constantly being updated. So that's really important that is being done, because many times what happens is that you have a breach, because you can't guarantee you're not going to get breached. But the worst thing that can happen is you get a breach, and because you're not effective in responding, you make it worse. Or sometimes you think, okay, I start to recover my backups, and you restore the systems, but the cyber criminal is still in the network. So they go back and re-encrypt the data. So the whole goal is a fast, coordinated response can make all the difference in protecting your data and your reputation. Because we can do everything we can proactively prevent a breach, but when it happens, we better be ready. And we have a plan. You have roles and responsibilities that everybody knows what they need to be doing, right? And it's action time. So that's the reason for having an effective incident response plan. AI, HIPAA, and cybersecurity. So from a HIPAA and cybersecurity standpoint, from my AI, many of the tools now that are out there, cybersecurity monitoring tools, threat detection tools, are already starting to incorporate AI into taking all these large amount of data and starting to identify what does it mean, are there anomalies, and then also implementing remedial action proactively as well as response proactively. So to see that more and more. One thing that we want to be careful, obviously, with the AI tools is that we want to make sure those tools are HIPAA compliant, right? Because they are ingesting data. And want to make sure they're HIPAA compliant from a security standpoint. And then as well as that, if you have AI vendors, they're signing obviously BAS and things like that. And again, AI is a tool, right? It doesn't replace your compliance process. It's meant to make it easier. It's meant to support it. It's meant to simplify, to automate things that are more manual, right? So it's really a tool. I always say that AI is like a calculator, right? And it's just meant to make your work easier, but it does not replace your compliance process. So let's talk about third-party vendor cyber risk management in healthcare. I think this is a really important topic because many organizations, especially small, medium organizations, are pretty much fully in the cloud. And usually what happens is there's always the assumption that, I moved into the cloud, I don't have to worry about it, right? The reality is actually you actually have to worry even more, because your security is only as strong as the weakest link. And sometimes the weakest link is outside your four walls. So when it comes to cloud vendor management or third-party cloud vendor management, what are the things that should be done? First of all, a quick question, how many of you do, I would say, before you sign up a contract with a cloud vendor, you have what I'll call a cybersecurity due diligence that you do for your cloud vendor? Cheryl is one of our clients, James West. So that's really, really important. I think I always say that third-party vendor risk assessment is the one area that you're allowed to be nosy about your neighbor, right? It's okay to be nosy, like find out what's going on in your house, right? What is your incident response plan? I want to know that. what is your cybersecurity program? What does that look like, right? What typically should be done is as part of because when you find a product or a cloud vendor out there that has a solution for you, and you like the features and the functionality and all that, then engaging your cybersecurity vendor or your IT team to do what we call a pre-contract due diligence, where they either send them a questionnaire, say, can you let me see your cybersecurity plan. What does that look like? How do you protect your data? How do you encrypt your data? How's that data separated from your other clients? How is that segmentation being done? What is your security incident response plan? What happens if you go down? What happens if you go down? What happens if you experience malware, you have a breach, you have ransomware? What are your mitigation controls? What are your response controls, right? It is your responsibility to know that, because if they go down and they control a critical part of your business, guess what? It impacts your operations. So it's your business to know how your third-party vendor, right, what kind of security they have in place. So you can send them a questionnaire. Some of the things, obviously, if they have cybersecurity certification, SOC 2 Type 2, or, high trust or ISO 27001, then generally that qualifies. They're already being audited, and so they have some at least kind of industry best practices. But if they don't, then you should ask more questions. You should ask more questions. So that is at the pre-contract stage, right? And then obviously from an ongoing standpoint, are you doing maybe annual or every 2 years, you kind of check in and see what's going on? Because what we find is, so a good example here is the Change Healthcare breach. How many were affected by the Change Healthcare breach? Yeah. So, it wasn't you, it was somebody else. They didn't do their part, but then you were impacted. And now your operations been impacted, your revenue cycles have been extended, all these things, right? Because somebody else didn't do their job. So making sure that that's in place, and then doing regular assessments, usually once or twice a year, or once every 2 years is effective. So that's really important. We're seeing more and more what we call supply chain attacks, right? Because cyber criminals know that, hey, if I impact that company that is connected to these other 100 companies, I can breach that company and then use their connection to these other 100 companies to find a way to get in. Or they share data with them, so I don't have to hack these organizations. I can just hack their adjacent organization and then get the same results. So third-party vendor management is something that typically, when you talk about cybersecurity, it's not something that small, medium organizations do, but it's becoming more and more of what I call due diligence or responsibility that we have to do. So it doesn't have to be anything like elaborate or anything like that. Start small, right? Start with inventory all your third-party vendors you use. Like a spreadsheet of all the third-party vendors you use. What data do they have, or what data do you exchange with them, right? Obviously, how critical is that data, right? And then maybe that's step one. You inventory that. That's the first year you get you'll be surprised, by the way, because a lot of times, when it comes to cloud products, many organizations don't have a handle around that. So you find that marketing, they procure their own products, and then operations does the same, something else. Finance does the same thing, something else, right? And that process is not centralized, right? And so what happens is, and then they sharing data that might be sensitive, marketing might be exchanging data that might be sensitive, and nobody knows about. So being able to centralize that and follow a procurement process that centralized is really, really important. And then implementing the due diligence component so that you can make sure that you have some control around that. All right, so final thoughts. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility, not just for the IT. Obviously, HIPAA compliance protects your patients and the organization. And then start from where you are. Progress is better than perfection. It's sometimes a lot to be done, but it's all about taking one step at a time and making that small progress over time, and then over time you become very effective. All right, so that's it about my slide. Any questions? Yes, sir.
If someone, on their desktop or their work laptop, they have a phishing attempt and they click on it, we see how that gets on it, but how does it relate if they're home checking their email on their cell phone? Mm-hmm. You're connected to Microsoft Exchange. Is there protections in that, or is it the same thing as if sitting at the desktop and opening it?
So that's why it's so important to have policies around bring your own device, right? Because the personal device they're using to access corporate email doesn't have, let's say, when you have a corporate laptop or computer, you're doing patching, you're doing security updates, right? You have a firewall, you have security monitoring, but you don't have those controls for a personal device, right? So if they're going to access emails, there's no way that your IT company or security company can actually see that. And so there's what's called mobile device management. It's a function of Microsoft 365 or Intune, right, where you can secure those. You can take a personal device and then basically secure the corporate data so that even if the personal side of the device gets compromised, they can access the encrypted and secured part of the corporate device. Because it's true that if I access my email through my mobile phone and I click on a phishing email, right, that has malware and it gets installed on my iPhone, guess what? Now they can see my emails, they can intercept those emails and things like that. So it's important that if you're going to allow people to use their personal devices, then you implement, typically it's called mobile device management. There's several tools out there that you can use to protect your corporate information. Questions?
So that's how I met George. But we would not have been able to get cyber insurance again if we had not had security systems in place. So we had cyber insurance and we did a claim and all that and managed through it. But in order to renew, I had to have a security plan in place, and they had to produce a report showing that I had all these systems in place in order to get renewal.
Hopefully all of you have cyber insurance. Yes. Any other questions, comments?
Cell phone stuff saying, we had once got a phone call from somebody saying there was some in Bitcoin.
Yeah, and they're getting better and better over time, and now they're using AI, right? So a lot of those kind of phishing campaigns from the cyber criminal standpoint are usually automated, right? Many times, depending on the amount of dollar amount that could be obtained from that campaign, they might be more targeted, where they actually spend the time to research, investigate your company, right? So they take a lot of time to do that. And so when they do that, they know who's the CEO, who's in accounting. They take the time to actually figure out what the lay of the land is. And then those phishing campaigns, they will even take your email signature, and they will use that as well. So you find that those attacks are very, very targeted. Awareness training is going to be part of your continuous process that you're doing, right? And that's being updated on an ongoing basis because we're constantly having to, find ways to make sure that, the users are more aware. Yeah, I mean, it just happens all the time. All right, well, thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time. If anybody has a question, they want to kind of come out and ask me, I'm here. I'm open.